The quickest way to lose the respect of an entire community is to believe that power gives you the right to decide who deserves dignity before you know their story. It was just after 10 o'clock on a bright Saturday morning in a quiet Atlanta neighborhood where the annual Community Appreciation Fair had already filled the streets with families, church volunteers, local musicians, and small business owners greeting one another beneath rows of colorful banners. Children laughed as they carried balloons through the park while food trucks served fresh barbecue and homemade lemonade to long lines of smiling customers. Nothing about the morning suggested that within the next few minutes one ordinary intersection would become the center of a moment that hundreds of people would never forget. Evelyn Carter, a 62-year-old black mother known throughout the neighborhood for decades of volunteer work, walked steadily toward the community center carrying a canvas bag filled with donated school supplies and paperwork for a scholarship fundraiser. She wore a light blue cardigan over a simple white blouse, comfortable walking shoes, and a silver cross necklace that had belonged to her late husband. Nearly everyone who lived nearby recognized her warm smile, but that familiarity meant nothing to one person arriving in a marked police cruiser. Officer Ryan Mitchell, a white police officer assigned to festival security, noticed Evelyn crossing toward the community center and immediately stepped into her path. His expression remained serious as he raised one hand. "Ma'am, I need you to stop right there." Evelyn stopped without hesitation and answered politely. "Good morning, officer. Is there something I can help you with?" Ryan looked briefly at the canvas bag before returning his attention to her face. "Where are you going?" Evelyn calmly pointed toward the brick community center, standing less than 100 feet away. "I am delivering supplies for today's scholarship event." Ryan folded his arms. "Do you have identification?" Without showing the slightest frustration, Evelyn reached into her purse and handed him her driver's license together with her volunteer identification badge. Ryan studied both cards longer than necessary before looking around the growing crowd. Several nearby residents slowed their pace after noticing the unusual conversation. A local baker paused while unloading pastries. Two teenagers stopped beside a lemonade stand. Parents waiting with their children quietly turned to watch. Evelyn remained composed, her hands folded gently in front of her as she waited. Ryan continued asking questions even after reading every detail on her identification. "How long have you been coming here?" Evelyn answered honestly. "Almost 20 years." Ryan looked toward the community center again before speaking in a firmer tone. "Stay exactly where you are until I finish checking everything." The warmth of the festival seemed to fade around the small circle forming at the intersection. Quiet conversations replaced cheerful laughter as more people sensed something was wrong. One teenager discreetly raised a phone and began recording. Another followed only seconds later. Evelyn noticed the cameras, but never changed her expression. She had lived long enough to understand that dignity often speaks loudest when everything around it becomes louder. Ryan remained convinced he was completely in control, unaware that within the next few minutes this ordinary stop would become a story no one standing on that corner would ever forget. Evelyn Carter remained exactly where Officer Ryan Mitchell had instructed her to stand, her canvas bag resting quietly against her leg while the sounds of the community festival continued around them. The cheerful music from a nearby jazz quartet drifted through the warm morning air, but inside the small circle forming around the intersection, the atmosphere had become noticeably heavier. Ryan looked once more at her driver's license and volunteer identification before speaking again. "You said you have been volunteering here for almost 20 years. Evelyn answered with the same calm voice she had maintained from the beginning. "Yes, officer. The scholarship committee meets every year before the festival begins." Ryan glanced toward the community center, then back at Evelyn. "Who exactly are you meeting?" She responded without hesitation. "Pastor Lewis, the scholarship board, and several neighborhood volunteers." A woman standing outside the bakery quietly whispered to her husband, "Everyone around here knows Miss Evelyn." He nodded but remained silent, understanding that interrupting the situation would only make it more difficult. Ryan continued asking questions, each one sounding less like an effort to gather information and more like an attempt to justify keeping her there. "What is inside the bag?" Evelyn slowly opened the canvas bag so he could see neatly organized folders, notebooks, boxes of colored pencils, and sealed packages of school supplies. Everything was donated for the students receiving scholarships this afternoon. Ryan examined the contents without touching them before asking another question. Do you have permission to bring these items into the building? Evelyn gave a gentle smile. The community center asked me to deliver them before the event begins. Despite every answer matching the facts, Ryan showed no sign that he intended to end the conversation. Around them, more residents stopped to watch. Several teenagers quietly recorded from different angles, while parents encouraged younger children to stay a respectful distance away. No one shouted. No one interfered. They simply watched with growing concern as a woman they had known for years remained standing under unnecessary scrutiny. Evelyn never raised her voice. She had spent a lifetime teaching neighborhood children that respect should never depend on how someone else chooses to behave. She refused to abandon that lesson now. Ryan folded his arms once more. Until I finish verifying everything, you are not going anywhere. Evelyn nodded politely. I understand that you have a job to do. Her answer seemed almost to surprise him. He had expected frustration. Instead, he found patience. Yet he still could not let go of the assumptions that had shaped his first impression. As the minutes passed, the scholarship volunteers waiting inside the community center began looking through the front windows, wondering why Evelyn had not arrived. One volunteer reached for a phone, preparing to call her, but before the call could be placed, Evelyn quietly removed her own phone from her purse. Without drawing attention to herself, she typed a single message with steady hands. It contained only 4 simple words. Please come if possible. She pressed send, locked the screen, and gently returned the phone to her purse. No explanation. No complaint. No accusation. Ryan never noticed the message. He remained focused on proving that his decision to stop her had been justified. The people watching, however, sensed that something important had just happened, even if they did not know who would receive those 4 words or how profoundly they would change the rest of that morning. Evelyn Carter slipped her phone back into her purse as though she had done nothing more than check the time, and the intersection settled into an uneasy silence that felt strangely disconnected from the cheerful festival surrounding it. The music continued drifting through the neighborhood park. Children laughed somewhere beyond the food trucks, and volunteers carried folding chairs toward the community center. Yet everyone standing near Officer Ryan Mitchell seemed to feel that the ordinary rhythm of the morning had quietly stopped. Ryan remained convinced that patience on Evelyn's part simply confirmed his authority over the situation. He glanced toward his patrol vehicle before speaking again. Someone from the community center can verify your story if necessary. Evelyn answered with complete composure. They certainly can. Ryan nodded, believing each passing minute strengthened his decision rather than weakened it. Around them, more phones appeared. Several people had already shared short video clips with friends and neighbors, and within minutes local community pages began circulating questions about why a well-known volunteer remained standing at the intersection under continued questioning. Nobody shouted accusations. Nobody encouraged confrontation. Instead, the growing attention reflected genuine confusion from residents who knew Evelyn's reputation better than anyone. Inside the community center, Pastor Lewis stepped outside after learning that Evelyn still had not arrived with the scholarship materials. He looked toward the intersection from nearly 100 yards away, but could not clearly understand what was happening through the growing crowd. Before he could begin walking over, a volunteer beside him quietly said, "People are recording something." Pastor Lewis frowned with concern, but chose not to rush into the situation without understanding it. Back at the intersection, Ryan returned Evelyn's identification but continued keeping her there. Remain where you are for a few more minutes. Evelyn accepted the documents with a polite nod. Of course, officer. Her steady voice never changed, even though she understood that every unnecessary minute delayed an event intended to help neighborhood students prepare for college. She thought briefly about the children waiting for the scholarship ceremony and hoped the volunteers inside would begin organizing without her. Then her thoughts returned to the short message she had sent only moments earlier. She knew the person receiving it would understand exactly why those 4 simple words mattered. Several blocks away, inside a black sport utility vehicle traveling through downtown Atlanta, a phone vibrated quietly on the center console. A man wearing a navy blue suit glanced at the screen while speaking with members of a small communications team traveling beside him. His expression changed almost instantly after reading the message. There were no dramatic words, no visible panic, only calm determination. He looked toward the driver and spoke in an even voice. Please change our route. We need to stop at the community festival first. One member of the team noticed the seriousness in his face and simply replied, Understood. The vehicle turned smoothly toward the neighborhood without unnecessary urgency. None of them knew exactly what they would find when they arrived, but they trusted that if Evelyn Carter had asked for help, there was a reason. Back at the festival, Officer Ryan Mitchell watched the growing crowd without realizing that attention had already spread beyond the intersection. He believed he still controlled every part of the situation. What he could not possibly know was that before long, cameras far more influential than the phones surrounding him would begin arriving, and the quiet confidence of one respected mother was about to meet a truth that would change the entire street. The growing crowd parted almost instinctively as 3 black sport utility vehicles turned slowly onto the street beside the community festival. They did not arrive with flashing lights or dramatic urgency. Instead, they rolled forward with quiet purpose before stopping near the intersection where Evelyn Carter still stood holding her canvas bag. Officer Ryan Mitchell glanced toward the vehicles but showed little interest at first. He assumed they belonged to another group attending the festival. Several people in the crowd, however, noticed something different almost immediately. Men and women carrying professional camera equipment stepped out first, followed by reporters holding microphones displaying the logos of well-known Atlanta television stations and several regional news organizations. Curious whispers spread quickly through the spectators. "Why is the press here?" someone quietly asked. Another resident shrugged, equally confused. Ryan looked briefly toward the arriving media before returning his attention to Evelyn. "Ma'am, I still need you to remain here until I finish." Evelyn simply nodded. "I understand." Her calm never wavered. She did not glance toward the arriving vehicles or signal anyone waiting outside them. She simply remained where she had been asked to stand, allowing the situation to unfold without adding a single unnecessary word. Moments later, the rear passenger door of the second vehicle opened, and a tall black man wearing a navy blue suit stepped onto the sidewalk. His movements were unhurried, his expression composed, and his attention fixed entirely on the woman standing several yards away. The reporters who had arrived with him remained respectfully behind, allowing him to walk alone toward the intersection. No one in the crowd recognized him immediately, but many sensed from the quiet professionalism surrounding him that he was someone of importance. Officer Ryan Mitchell finally turned to face the approaching man. "Sir, this area is currently part of an active police investigation." The man slowed to a stop several feet away without showing the slightest irritation. His voice remained calm and respectful. "Officer, I appreciate the work you are doing." Ryan nodded slightly, expecting the conversation to end there. Instead, the man walked past him only after receiving a small gesture from Ryan allowing him to approach the woman. He stopped directly in front of Evelyn, his serious expression softening into quiet concern. "Mother," he asked gently, "are you all right?" Evelyn looked up at him with the reassuring smile she had offered everyone else that morning. "I am fine, Marcus. Thank you for coming." Marcus Carter nodded once before taking the canvas bag from her hands. "I came because your message told me you needed me." She answered softly. "I knew you would understand." The exchange lasted only a few seconds, yet it transformed the atmosphere more completely than anything that had happened all morning. The cameras surrounding the intersection recorded every word without interruption. Reporters remained silent, recognizing that the most important story unfolding before them required no narration. Ryan watched the conversation with growing uncertainty. Until that moment, he had believed he understood everyone involved. Now he realized there was an entire story he had never considered. He looked from Evelyn to Marcus and noticed how naturally the reporters, photographers, and communications staff deferred to the quiet man standing beside his mother. The realization had not yet fully reached him, but it was already beginning to change the expressions of everyone watching. Before another minute passed, one familiar name would ripple through the crowd, and the ordinary assumptions that had shaped the entire morning would disappear almost instantly. For several long seconds, no one on the crowded street said a word. The only sounds came from distant music drifting across the festival and the soft clicking of camera shutters as reporters quietly documented the unfolding moment. Marcus Carter stood beside his mother with one hand resting gently on the canvas bag she had been carrying all morning, his attention remaining entirely on her rather than the growing audience surrounding them. Officer Ryan Mitchell watched carefully, sensing that something important was happening even though he still did not fully understand why so many members of the media had suddenly gathered at an ordinary neighborhood intersection. Then one of the television reporters, recognizing the man who had just arrived, quietly spoke to a cameraman standing beside her. "That is Senator Marcus Carter." The words were not intended to draw attention, yet they spread through the crowd almost instantly. Several people looked at one another with surprise before turning back toward the quiet man standing beside Evelyn. Ryan's expression changed immediately. He looked from Marcus to Evelyn and then back toward the reporters, finally realizing that the woman he had kept waiting for so long was the mother of one of the state's most respected United States senators. Before he could respond, another police vehicle arrived at the scene. Lieutenant Rebecca Collins stepped out after receiving information that an unusually large crowd and several media organizations had gathered near the community festival. As she approached, one glance toward Marcus was enough for recognition to appear across her face. She walked forward calmly and extended her hand. "Senator Carter, thank you for being here." Marcus accepted the handshake politely. "Thank you, Lieutenant." She then turned toward Evelyn with equal respect. "Ma'am, I hope you are doing well." Evelyn answered with her familiar, gentle smile. "I appreciate your concern. I am doing fine." Lieutenant Collins looked briefly toward Officer Ryan Mitchell before returning her attention to Marcus. "I understand there has been a misunderstanding this morning. We will make sure everything is reviewed according to department policy." Marcus nodded without hesitation. "That is all I would ask, Lieutenant. I am not here asking for special treatment because of my position. I simply believe every citizen deserves to be treated with dignity before assumptions are made." His voice remained measured, calm, and completely free of anger. Several reporters lowered their microphones slightly, recognizing that the most powerful statement being made that morning was not political. It was personal. Ryan stood silently, listening to every word. The confidence that had guided him throughout the encounter slowly gave way to reflection. He replayed the conversation in his mind and realized that Evelyn had answered every question respectfully, provided every document requested, and cooperated with every instruction without complaint. The only thing that had changed now was not her behavior, but the information he had failed to consider before forming his first impression. Around the intersection, the crowd grew noticeably quieter. Some people lowered their phones, no longer recording out of curiosity, but witnessing what had become an important lesson in humility, accountability, and public service. Marcus gently looked toward his mother once more. "Mother, thank you for remaining exactly who you have always been." Evelyn smiled softly. "Respect is not something we practice only when life is easy." Those simple words settled over the entire street more deeply than any speech could have, and in that quiet moment, everyone present understood that true authority had never arrived inside a government vehicle or behind a television camera. It had been standing there all along in the quiet dignity of a mother who refused to surrender her character, no matter how she was treated. Evelyn Carter remained beside her son as the crowd slowly settled into an almost complete silence. The festival had not stopped, yet the atmosphere surrounding the intersection felt entirely different from only a few minutes earlier. People were no longer waiting for conflict. They were waiting to see what genuine leadership would look like when everyone involved had the opportunity to choose dignity instead of pride. Senator Marcus Carter looked toward Lieutenant Rebecca Collins before speaking in the same calm voice he had used since arriving. "Lieutenant, I appreciate your willingness to come personally." She nodded respectfully. "Every situation deserves a careful review, Senator." Marcus answered with a slight smile. "Please do not call me Senator because I am standing beside my mother today. Right now, I am simply her son." The sincerity of his words immediately changed the mood. Several reporters exchanged quiet glances, recognizing that the statement carried more weight than any prepared speech could have delivered. Lieutenant Collins acknowledged his request with a nod. Then, "Marcus, I assure you we will handle this fairly." Marcus looked briefly toward Officer Ryan Mitchell, who remained standing several feet away, visibly reflecting on everything that had unfolded. There was no anger in Marcus's expression, only steady resolve. "Officer Mitchell," he said, My mother has spent more than 20 years serving this neighborhood. She has never expected special treatment, and neither do I. The only thing I ask is that every person receives the same respect before conclusions are reached." Ryan listened without interruption. For the first time that morning, he realized that the conversation was no longer about authority. It was about responsibility. He slowly met Marcus's eyes before turning toward Evelyn. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you cooperated with every request I made today." Evelyn answered gently. "I believed remaining respectful was the right thing to do." Ryan lowered his head briefly. "I recognize that now." The words were simple, but everyone standing nearby understood how difficult they were to say. Marcus did not respond immediately. He allowed the silence to speak before answering. Acknowledging a mistake is never a sign of weakness. Refusing to learn from one is. Lieutenant Collins looked toward the officers standing behind the patrol vehicles and then back to Ryan. "Our responsibility is not only to enforce the law, it is also to strengthen the trust that allows communities and law enforcement to stand together." Ryan nodded. "I understand, Lieutenant." Across the street, Pastor Lewis finally approached the intersection carrying several scholarship folders. He smiled warmly at Evelyn. "We have been waiting for you, but the students will be just as excited when you arrive." Evelyn laughed softly for the first time that morning. "I apologize for keeping everyone waiting." Pastor Lewis shook his head. "Some lessons take longer than meetings." His quiet remark drew gentle smiles from several people standing nearby. The reporters continued recording, but none attempted to interrupt the moment. They understood they were witnessing something more meaningful than a headline. This was not a story about power defeating power. It was a story about character remaining steady when tested. Marcus carefully handed the canvas bag back to his mother. "The children are waiting for you." Evelyn accepted it with the same peaceful expression she had carried throughout the entire encounter. Together they turned toward the community center, walking side by side, without celebration or resentment. Behind them, Officer Ryan Mitchell watched in thoughtful silence, realizing that the greatest lesson he would remember from that morning had not been delivered by a courtroom, a television camera, or the office of a United States Senator. It had been taught by a mother whose dignity never changed, even when someone else failed to recognize it. The scholarship ceremony began only a few minutes later, yet the conversations surrounding the morning's events continued quietly throughout the community center. Families filled the folding chairs arranged beneath colorful banners celebrating local students. Children proudly held certificates they had worked hard to earn, and volunteers resumed their responsibilities as though serving others remained the only purpose that truly mattered. Evelyn Carter moved naturally from table to table distributing school supplies, greeting every student by name whenever she could, never mentioning the unexpected delay that had brought so much attention to her that morning. Senator Marcus Carter stayed nearby, but deliberately remained in the background, helping volunteers arrange donated backpacks rather than standing beside the reporters who continued documenting the community event. Several members of the press noticed his decision and quietly lowered their cameras, understanding that the most meaningful story unfolding before them was not about political influence, but about a family choosing service over recognition. Before leaving the festival, one local reporter respectfully approached Marcus and asked, "Senator, would you like to make a statement regarding what happened today?" Marcus smiled politely before answering, "I believe my mother has already made the most important statement." The reporter looked toward Evelyn as she knelt beside a young student, carefully helping the child write his name on a scholarship folder. Marcus continued, "She reminded everyone that dignity is not something we protect only when life is fair. We protect it every single day." His answer lasted less than 30 seconds, yet everyone standing nearby understood that no prepared speech could have carried greater weight. Across the room, Lieutenant Rebecca Collins quietly spoke with Pastor Lewis after confirming that the department would complete its review according to established procedures. "Your community has shown remarkable patience today," she said. Pastor Lewis smiled gently. "Respect grows faster when people are willing to listen." Several officers assisting with festival security overheard the conversation. None interrupted. Instead, they quietly reflected on everything they had witnessed since the morning began. Officer Ryan Mitchell remained outside near the entrance to the community center for several moments before deciding to walk inside. He removed his sunglasses, looked toward Evelyn, and waited until she finished speaking with a group of students before approaching. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, "I wanted to thank you for the way you handled everything today." Evelyn turned toward him with the same calm smile she had offered him from the beginning. "Thank you, officer." Ryan hesitated briefly before continuing. "I have spent the entire morning thinking about my decisions. I cannot change how today began, but I can choose how I serve people tomorrow." Evelyn nodded with quiet understanding. "Every new day gives us that opportunity." There was no applause, no dramatic reaction, only a simple conversation between two people who understood that meaningful change often begins with honest reflection rather than perfect words. Marcus observed the exchange from across the room, but chose not to interrupt. He knew that some lessons belonged to the people living them. As the afternoon sunlight streamed through the large windows of the community center, illuminating rows of smiling students preparing for the scholarship presentation, the memory of the morning slowly transformed into something greater than a difficult encounter. It became an example that would remain with everyone present long after the festival ended, proving that true leadership is revealed not when people possess authority, but when they choose humility, accountability, and respect even after discovering they have been wrong. Over the following days, the story traveled far beyond the neighborhood where it had begun, not because anyone had sought publicity, but because the videos recorded by ordinary residents captured something that resonated with people across the city. Local television stations shared the complete sequence of events, emphasizing not confrontation, but the remarkable composure shown by Evelyn Carter and the measured response of Senator Marcus Carter. Community organizations began discussing the importance of treating every citizen with equal dignity before assumptions shaped decisions. Editorial writers described the encounter as a reminder that trust between communities and law enforcement is built one respectful interaction at a time. Throughout those conversations, Evelyn never accepted invitations to become the center of attention. When reporters requested exclusive interviews, she politely declined and encouraged them instead to highlight the scholarship program that had brought everyone together that Saturday morning. "If people remember anything," she quietly told one journalist, "I hope they remember the students who deserve every opportunity to succeed." Her words reflected the same quiet character she had demonstrated throughout the entire encounter. Marcus continued his schedule in the United States Senate, attending committee meetings, meeting with constituents, and fulfilling the responsibilities entrusted to him by the people he represented. During one community leadership forum several weeks later, a college student asked him whether his position had changed the outcome of what happened that morning. Marcus paused before answering. "My title should never determine how my mother is treated. The standard should be the same for every person who walks down any street in America." The audience responded with thoughtful silence before offering respectful applause. Lieutenant Rebecca Collins ensured that the department completed its review according to established procedures while also expanding discussions with officers about communication, professionalism, and public trust. Rather than focusing on blame, the department used the experience as an opportunity for learning and improvement. Officer Ryan Mitchell participated fully in those conversations. He listened carefully to community members describe how simple assumptions could shape lasting impressions, and he spoke honestly about the lesson he had learned from one ordinary Saturday that changed the way he viewed every future interaction. He no longer approached conversations believing that authority alone created respect. Instead, he understood that respect had to be offered before it could ever be returned. Back at the community center, life continued much as it always had. Evelyn organized school supply drives, visited elderly neighbors, prepared meals for families in need, and encouraged young students to believe that education could change their futures. The children who knew her simply called her Miss Evelyn, never thinking about the cameras or the headlines that had briefly surrounded her life. To them, she remained exactly who she had always been, the kind woman who remembered birthdays, celebrated good report cards, and greeted everyone with genuine warmth. One afternoon, Pastor Lewis watched Evelyn helping a group of elementary school students arrange donated books on library shelves and quietly remarked, "Some people teach lessons with speeches. Others teach them by the way they live." Evelyn smiled without looking up from her work. Actions usually stay in people's hearts longer than words. The afternoon sunlight poured through the community center windows as children laughed nearby, Volunteers continued unpacking donations, and neighbors greeted one another like family. The story that had once filled television screens had slowly become something far more meaningful than a news report. It had become a lasting reminder throughout the community that true justice begins long before titles, uniforms, or public recognition appear, because it begins the moment one person chooses to see another with fairness, humility, and respect. Several months later, the memory of that Saturday morning remained alive, not because people continued debating what had happened, but because they continued living differently after witnessing it. The scholarship recipients who had gathered inside the community center returned to school carrying new backpacks, fresh supplies, and a deeper understanding that dignity could be stronger than humiliation and that character often spoke more loudly than authority. Parents shared the story with their children not as a lesson about politics or public office, but as an example of remaining calm when faced with unfair assumptions. Teachers referenced it during classroom discussions about citizenship, reminding students that every person deserves to be seen as an individual before being judged by appearance. At the community center, Evelyn Carter continued arriving before sunrise every Saturday, unlocking the front doors, arranging folding tables, preparing coffee for volunteers, and greeting every visitor with the same warm smile that had never changed. Nothing about her daily routine suggested that she had become the subject of national attention. She preferred it that way. Whenever someone thanked her for inspiring so many people, she gently redirected the conversation toward the students, the volunteers, or the neighbors who worked quietly every week without expecting recognition. Senator Marcus Carter visited whenever his schedule allowed, but he never arrived with speeches prepared or cameras invited. He came as a son, helping his mother carry boxes, organize donations, and encourage young people to believe that kindness was never a sign of weakness. Their conversations remained simple, often ending with Evelyn reminding him that public service was measured less by titles than by the number of lives quietly improved along the way. Officer Ryan Mitchell also changed in ways that could not be measured by official reports alone. Fellow officers noticed that he took more time listening before asking questions, explained situations with greater patience, and treated every person with the same courtesy regardless of appearance, clothing, or neighborhood. During training sessions for newly hired officers, he occasionally reflected on one experience that had permanently shaped his understanding of responsibility. He never mentioned names. He simply reminded them that every encounter begins with a choice, and that respect offered at the beginning often prevents regret at the end. Lieutenant Rebecca Collins later described that lesson in a community meeting with remarkable simplicity. Professionalism begins long before difficult situations appear. It begins with the decision to recognize another person's humanity. Those words quietly echoed through the room because everyone present knew they reflected more than policy. They reflected experience. As seasons changed and another scholarship ceremony approached, the community gathered once again beneath colorful banners celebrating hope, education, and opportunity. Children laughed, volunteers unpacked donated books, neighbors greeted one another like old friends, and sunlight poured through the familiar windows just as it had before. Evelyn stood near the entrance, welcoming each family with genuine warmth, while Marcus watched proudly from across the room, grateful that his mother's greatest influence had never depended on his position. Looking around that room, it became impossible to remember the day only as a story about mistaken judgment or unexpected identity. It had become something far more enduring. It was the quiet proof that true justice does not always arrive with raised voices or dramatic victories. Sometimes it arrives through patience that refuses to become bitterness, humility that refuses to become pride, and truth that never needs to announce its own importance. He believed the badge gave him the right to decide who deserved respect. She quietly reminded everyone that respect is never granted by power. It is revealed by character.